Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching What If Naruto got banished after Sasuke retrieval art and become Mizukage. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Uzumaki Naruto's journal. Before I was informed of my ancestry, I went by Naruto Uzumaki, but now I go by Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze Uchiha. The village that had always been my home, Konohagakure, finally got what it had always desired when I was 13 years old. I was exiled and permanently gone. The reason I was exiled in the first place may be unclear to you, but it all began with a mission in which I had to bring my former teammate Sasuke Uchiha back to the village because he had left to increase his power naturally. The council, in their infinite wisdom, decided that he was too valuable to let go and sent Shikamaru Nara, Kiba Inuzuka and his partner Akamaru, Choji Akamichi, and Neji Hyuga. Since Sasuke had joined the Sound Four, we all chased him through the forest. Eventually, the group disbanded as we began fighting the Sound Four one-on-one, followed by Kimimaro, their fifth member. After beating Jirobo and Kitamaru, Choji and Neji both came dangerously close to death. Sakan and Yukon almost killed Kiba and Akamaru, but Konkuro intervened in time to save them. When Tamari rescued Shikamaru from Tayuya, this scenario was replicated. After that, I fought Kimimaro for a while, but I couldn't compete with him. I was saved by Rock Lee so that I could keep looking for Sasuke. Gaara then saved Rock Lee, and Kimamaro's death from illness saved them both. Sasuke chose not to kill me even though the battle ended in his favor when we faced off. The mission ultimately failed because Sasuke was able to join Orochimaru. I was ashamed of how weak I was at the time. I decided after that mission that we were enemies and that only one of us would leave the next time we saw each other. I was summoned to the council chambers, which were housed in the Hokage Tower, shortly after I was discharged from the hospital. Rewind Tower of Hokage Chamber of Council. Naruto could sense the tension that seemed to permeate the council chamber as soon as he walked in. By carefully examining the area, he was able to see everyone there. Shimura Danzo was at the top of the center. He was a cunning man who would use and sacrifice others to achieve his goals. Like all rumors about him, there were rumors that he occasionally collaborated with Orochimaru, but these were never confirmed. Utatane Kaharu and Mitokado Homura, former teammates of Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Sandaime Hokage, were the other two elders on either side of Danzo. According to Utatane Kaharu, the group is more significant than any one of its members. As a result, she always makes an effort to act in Konoha's best interests, even if it conflicts with the Hokages or her viewpoint. She is also very modest, but that doesn't stop her from speaking up. Despite this, Kaharu is one of the few individuals who can correct the fifth Hokage when she abuses her power. Like Homura, she occasionally leans more toward Danzo's viewpoint and is more militant than the Hokage she served under. Despite his tendency toward authoritarianism, Homura always looks out for the welfare of the village. Similar to Kaharu, he is more militant than the Hokage he was subordinate to and occasionally adopts Danzo's viewpoint. The clan leaders of the Hyuga, Inuzuka, Aburame, Akamichi, Nara, and Yamanaka were the other members of the council. Hyuga Hiyashi was a peculiar individual who at first neither liked nor hated Naruto, but after he vanquished Neji, he began to respect the boy because, as it were, he defied fate. Despite being Namikaze Minato's closest friend, he was powerless to help the boy due to the regulations imposed on Naruto, so one could argue that he was left to the wolves. Not only did Inuzuka Sume like Naruto before she even knew who he was, but she also liked him because his personality was more like hers in every way. His feral appearance didn't help either. She was one of the closest friends of Uzumaki Kushina, and she had attempted to adopt the boy into her clan, thinking that since he was more like an animal than anything else, he would be able to learn their clan's techniques. Aburame Shibi liked Naruto because he could identify with the boy because his clan had bugs in their bodies. Just like Naruto had the Kyuubi, they weren't foolish enough to associate the two since they were two different creatures. Since the Namikaze had been able to withstand all of the taunts, glares, and other abuse when any lesser man would have given in, Shibi had actually grown to respect them. Being the most intelligent clan in the world, the Ino, Shika, and Cho trio had always admired and liked the boy because they could tell he was just a boy. They also liked Naruto because their kids looked up to him as he grew older, which made them want to train even more. With Tsunade occupying the Hokage seat, they were all now seated in their clan seats. The Jonins and Chunins, who were Naruto's friends and sensei, were seated on the opposite side of the room after being summoned. Danzo's eyes narrowed as he heard Naruto speak. He asked the bewildered boy with the blonde hair, who blinked at him, "Do you know the reason for why you've been called?" Raising an eyebrow as though to inquire as to why he was here, Naruto clarified, Not really, I was just told I had to come here." For some reason, Danzo appeared smug for a moment. Almost all of the shinobi turned to stare at him in disbelief as he said, "We, of the council, have viewed everything that had happened on the latest mission, and given certain circumstances, we have voted to have you exiled from Konohagakure indefinitely." Tsunade yelled in shock. "What?" Looking at Naruto with hate in her squinted eyes, Koharu said, "Naruto Uzumaki failed to bring back Sasuke Uchiha and allowed him to go to Otogakure with Orochimaru. For that action he must be banished. He also used his tenant's power while fighting the Uchiha, putting his life in danger along with anyone else who may come in contact with the boy in the future. Naruto Uzumaki is a ticking time bomb ready to explode," Homura clarified. "We wanted to execute him. The incident at the Valley of the End was not the only time that demonic chakra has been sensed. It was reported on his first mission out of the village, as well as during the Chunin exams, and after then, when Sanagakure was invading, we gave him a chance, but enough is enough. However, we've seen how you favor the boy, so decided on exiling him instead," Danzo said as he focused on the enraged tease while maintaining a lowered head. Fortunately, it wasn't exactly a secret anymore because Naruto's friends were already aware of the Kyuubi and didn't think there was anything wrong with the blonde boy. Tsunade yelled, "His seal has not been damaged. It most certainly isn't breaking. Have you no faith in the Yondaime's sacrifice?" The Yondaime, gifted as he was not infallible, and Jiraiya's been keeping an eye on the boy. He's a seal master in his own right. So you honestly think that he wouldn't notice if anything was wrong with it? Tsunade was speechless. How dare they? Who exactly do they believe they're interacting with? The seal that the Yondaime crafted for the boy was one of his own designs. It's one of a kind, and only the Yondaime knew how it worked properly. Jiraiya is not qualified to make decisions in the boy. Tsunade knew she had to put an end to this, so she asked, "And you are?" The council's murmurs, especially the civilian half, weren't consoling. She started to say something, but Koharu interrupted. "So you say that the seal isn't breaking? Well then, what excuse has Uzumaki got for using the demonic chakra? If what you're saying is correct, then the fact that he can call up the demon's chakra himself is something that's even more troubling. At least the Uchiha's seal warrants an excuse for his behavior. That tiny little thing?" Tsunade was having trouble controlling her temper. Before anyone could say anything, they heard laughter. As they turned to face the owner, they noticed Naruto laughing, but it was a hollow laugh rather than a funny one. He muttered, "You know," to get everyone's attention. He spoke so coldly that many people actually shuddered, and the elders became indignant. "I was wondering how long it would take the council to pull this one, treating me as the scapegoat, all because you old bag of bones can't even shit right without help. So what do? Pick the usual punching bag to place all blame on because of your incompetence," he said. "Listen here, boy," Danzo began, but before he could finish, a kunai flew by and chopped off a few hairs from the side of his head. He turned to face Naruto, who had his arm extended and a chilly expression on his face. "No, you listen to me," he said almost impatiently. The way Naruto was acting astounded everyone else, and they all turned to watch him. "You say I'm dangerous because I have access to the Kyuubi's power and I'll use it to practically kill and destroy? If that is the case, then why is this village still standing?" He asked rhetorically. As he looked around he said, "I have every reason to say fuck it and release Kyuubi and reduce the village to nothing, but I don't because I actually have people who see me for me and not some weapon, monster, or abomination that should be destroyed. Everything I have ever done is for their safety, and I have put my life on the line protecting everyone who is precious to me, and I'm the one on trial here, being told I am a ticking time bomb. Right now, you have no idea how close you are." With anger evident on her face, Koharu gritted her teeth and said, "You are a danger to everyone here. It is only a matter of time before your presence brings destruction to Konoha." Suddenly, everything seemed to make sense to Naruto, and a tiny smile appeared on his face. He said smugly, "I know the real reason you're all doing this," which made the civilian council and elders stiffen. "Your fear for those outside the village is amazing. You're not worried about the people of this village. You're worried about yourselves, worried that I have a group of S-rank missing nin after me for the power of Kyuubi, and you know they will come for me, just like Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki did recently. Am I right?" He raised his eyebrows. Sume asked in confusion, not knowing who this group was. "What?" "The Akatsuki," Jiraiya said, emerging from the shadows with a frown on his face after listening to everything. "Or a group of S-rank missing nin after the Biju's power for God only knows what, and what Naruto is getting at is that the elders and civilian council want to banish him to protect themselves. The fact that Naruto was in such danger and the village was discarding him to save themselves astounded everyone who had heard. Bringing the focus back to himself, Danzo said, "That is irrelevant as of now. Right now we will place a vote, whether or not Naruto Uzumaki will be banished or not. All four? He asked, raising his own hand in unison with the civilian council and advisors, which constituted the majority of the council at this point because the village's clans had ceased to exist. And against? He asked in a smug manner, already aware of the outcome, as Tsunade and the clans raised their hands in defeat while still expressing their support for Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, you will be out of this village within 24 hours or you will be executed. You can't do this. After using her name rather than Ba-chan, Tsunade was stopped in her tracks when Naruto said, Tsunade. She looked up at him and noticed that he was grinning despite the situation. When he saw her look down, he sighed and turned to Danzo, who smirked. Don't worry, this is the best for everyone and you know it deep down, he said. Before he left the council chambers, he said, his eyes crimson, oh, and when you record this down, I want my full name there. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. So when you people find yourself in trouble with your enemies or if Akatsuki decide to attack anyway, don't you dare ask for my help because as far as I'm concerned, this village can burn to the ground. There were many people in disbelieving. Sakura said, he's the son of, but was unable to complete the sentence. Yeah, Kakashi replied, letting out a sorrowful sigh at having let his sensei's son down. Neji uttered in surprise, and this village has just banished him. The council's shinobi, civilian, and elder factions weren't doing much better, but Inoichi expressed what everyone was thinking. Dear God, what have we done? End of flashback. For the first time in my life, I wanted the village to feel afraid and think that I wouldn't help them. The only reason I would ever do so is because of Tsunade and Jiraiya, as well as my beloved people of course. I wouldn't let the village burn down because I was angry with the elders. But enough about those unpleasant recollections. I should also begin to explain why I am Uchiha. You read correctly. I'm a Uchiha. A few days after I was exiled at the age of 13, I learned. Bandits attacked me while I was traveling to Nami no Kuni. Ordinarily, it would have been simpler to kill them, but I was starved and without water for days. When a bandit was about to cut me in two during the battle, everything had slowed down to the point where it seemed like time had stopped. I took advantage of this and used what was left of my strength to kill them. Afterwards, I discovered a lake where I checked in, and to my surprise, the Sharingan was staring back at me. I was initially relieved that I had a family, knew my origins, and was a member of a clan. Then I realized that no matter how much I wanted to, I would never get to meet my parents because they were all dead. Having the Sharingan made learning much easier for me and helped me understand a lot of things. Fortunately, it also improved my knowledge. My Uchiha side was probably represented by my nature affinities, which turned out to be Futon, Raiden, Suiden, and Kaden. I ended up in Kumogakure towards the end of the first year of my banishment, where I began training in Raiden Jutsu. Fortunately, I was able to find two other Jinchuriki who assisted me in my training. Yugito Ni, the Nibi Jinchuriki, and Killer B, the Hachibi Jinchuriki. I became proficient in that element's jutsu and Raiden along with the Raikage. I also met Karui, Samui, and Omoi. Even though the Toads had vowed not to tell Jiraiya I was there, I learned a lot while training at Mount Myobokuzen when I was 15. I studied Sharingan, Jutsu, and Hiraishin there until I was 16. The Toads warned me that if I left, they would have to terminate the agreement because I was no longer faithful to Konoha, which they were. Even though it was painful to lose my relationship with my father, I understood that I had to pave my own way if I wanted to be resilient and change the world. It got to the point where I met my final sensei shortly after I turned 17, Uchiha Itachi. I don't know where I would be now if it weren't for Itachi. I was going to fight him when I first met him, but when I saw that he was not wearing the Akatsuki cloak, I asked him what he wanted, and he just said that he wanted to teach me and that I should be informed of the truth. Itachi decided to reveal my parents to me. My father, Namikaze Minato, also known as the Yondaime Hokage, was one of the greatest shinobi in history. I must admit that at first I was furious that my father had cursed me to a life of hell, but I eventually had to come to terms with the fact that he had done it because he couldn't ask someone else's family to do it. He didn't anticipate that this village would stab him in the back, fuck his final wish, and act like the scum that they are. My mother, or perhaps I should say mothers, came next. My biological mother, Makoto Uchiha, and I were born to Kushina Uzumaki. I was initially perplexed by what this meant, but fortunately Itachi clarified it for me. Itachi was unaware of whether this was intentional or simply the result of my mother's body reacting negatively to the Kyuubi's chakra, but it appears that my father and mother, Kushina, were unable to conceive because the Kyuubi's chakra interfered with her fertility and rendered her infertile. Their best friend, Makoto Uchiha, donated her eggs, which were implanted into my mother along with my father's sperm. I didn't want to know this information, but I had to know it. I was an Uzumaki, Namikaze, and Uchiha at the time. Furthermore, it turns out that Sasuke is also my brother, something I never would have imagined. Although Mikoto had kept quiet about my true origins, she had attempted to adopt me when my parents passed away the night of my birth, knowing that I was partially Uchiha. However, Fugaku quickly put an end to any hopes of that happening. Even though she had instructed my brother Itachi to watch over me as I grew up and keep me safe from harm, she was compelled to let me go. Even though I'm still unsure of my biological mother, I would still love both of them. Kushina for giving me life and wanting me in her life, and Mikoto for raising me and facilitating my birth. I was angry when I heard the truth, not at Itachi or my parents, but at the Sandaime, who I considered to be my grandfather and who had been lying to me directly for years. It didn't help when I discovered that I had the Kyuubi sealed in me. I had pleaded and begged the man, but all he said was that he had found me in the forest following the Kyuubi attack, with no sign of my parents. Why would a parent want a demon for their child? I had assumed that everything made sense. I would have made what Orochimaru did seem like child's play if the Sandaime had been around when I learned about it. However, I acquired a new Sharingan level while training with Itachi. As long as both siblings have acquired the Mangekyo Sharingan, taking their eyes is what is known as Ain no Mangekyo Sharingan. Sasuke had implanted our mother's eyes in place of Itachi's when he killed the latter. After putting me through a lot of training when I first met Itachi, he eventually sent me to Tsukuyomi to see my mother die, which made me feel sad and angry and awakened the Mangekyo Sharingan. Although my design was different from other Sharingans, which have a black design and red background, we discovered that it was comparable to Itachi's in terms of abilities. The Mangekyo looked like a hexagon with 6 spiral-like points rising from each hexagonal face. However, I started to lose my vision as a result of using it excessively. Itachi was able to fix that and instructed me to take his eyes. Although I initially objected, he nearly coerced me into having them implanted in my eyes. Combining our two abilities to create something neither of us could have predicted gave me incredible strength. Itachi told me that he had our mother's eyes, which she had pleaded with him to keep for the future after she had acquired the Mangekyo Sharingan from Fugaku's betrayal. It must have been inherited or something because they surprisingly possessed the same skills as his old eyes. They were used by Itachi to fight Sasuke, and I can now exact my revenge on my brother, Sasuke Uchiha, using both of our eyes. Itachi gave me a scroll of my father's writings about the Namikaze Genkai before he abandoned me to die. I was surprised because I had no idea they had one. However, I knew everything until I met Itachi. I received some news from Kirigakure on my 18th birthday. The civil war continued to rage. Haku and Zabuza had mentioned Kirigakure and the murders of people with Kekkei Genkai, and I recalled that now that I was strong, S-class, actually, from all of my training and the torture Itachi had subjected me to, the starting point of my journey was Kirigakure. Mizu no Kuni Sato no Kirigakure. 9 years had gone by since Naruto Uzumaki, now 22, was exiled from Konohagakure no Sato at the age of 13 and changed his name to Naruto Uzumaki. Namikaze Uchiha, the same man, had entered Mizu no Kuni, the land of water, 5 years prior, fighting with Mei Terumi and the rebellion to liberate the stunning village from Yagura the Yondaime Mizukage's oppression and restore the Chigiri no Sato, village of the Bloody Mist, to its former splendor. The Mizukage's palace was the largest and widest of the many cylindrical structures that made up Kirigakure's architecture. As implied by its name, the village was hard for outsiders to locate because of the dense fog and the surrounding mountains. The village had grown into a vibrant community after Naruto assisted in its liberation. Men were just relaxing, women were strolling and laughing, children were playing in the streets, and vendors were selling their wares. The Kirigakure that had been despised for years was not this one. Naruto had made this his new home, and he had no intention of leaving. The palace of Mizukage, a man who was 6 feet 2 inches and sat behind the main desk in the Mizukage's office, had blonde, spiky hair with black highlights that stood out everywhere and hung past his shoulder blades, resembling Madara Uchiha's hairstyle. He had a tanned face that was pristine, not even marred by a dust spot. His bright blue eyes had vanished, leaving him with dark onyx eyes that showed some warmth, but not as much as before. He stared blankly at the 7 swordsmen of the mist, or Kiri no Shinobi Katana Shichin and Shu, who were arranged in a line in front of him. Being ambidextrous, he wore a shuriken and kunai holster strapped to each leg, a pair of baggy black cargo pants with multiple extra pockets, and a steel-toed black combat boot. In addition, he wore a utility belt with scrolls for convenience and multiple pouches. In addition to his regular black t-shirt with an upturned collar covering his neck, he wore a black trench coat without sleeves that had crimson fire licking the bottom, similar to his father's own trench coat because it had no sleeves. The t-shirt only covered his biceps, but he did have on a pair of fingerless gloves that appeared to be ideal for combat because they had metal plating built into them. Godem Mizukage was written in gold stitching on the back of the trench, with the Uzumaki spiral on the right, the Namikaze clan crest on the left, and the Uchiha crest at the top. His neck was covered by the collar of his trench coat. The Godem Hokage, Tsunade Senju, and his mother figure gave him the Shodai Hokage no Kabikazari, the first Hokage's necklace, which was a lovely silver chained necklace around his neck. This was Kirigakure's savior and Godem Mizukage, Naruto Uzumaki. Once Yagura was killed, he was offered the role of Mizukage for his assistance in saving Kirigakure with Mei Terumi and the rebels. He had been apprehensive at first, but after hearing Mei's words, he finally agreed. He could help a lot of people because he was Mizukage, and he did since Naruto's own values aligned with those of the Shodem Hokage. Kirigakure was now a serene place that even adhered to their principles. Though it may have been the Uchiha side of him, Naruto still believed in peace and, well, Hashirama Senju's ideals, despite having grown up into a true shinobi who killed if he had to without regret, something he inherited from Itachi. People in the village waved, grinned, and treated him like a hero and a regular person wherever he went instead of worshipping him or bowing down to him like servants. They merely loved and respected him. He had been sued for something, which seemed strange given his history. With the exception of a small amount of information and his own knowledge, he had not heard from Konohagakure or his friends since being exiled after killing Itachi Uchiha. Sasuke Uchiha was greeted with open arms in Konoha, as though he hadn't betrayed them. That wasn't what annoyed him. Okay, so it was on a certain level, but the main point was that Sasuke was actually Makoto's half-brother the entire time. Sometimes irony was a real bitch. He had occasionally considered attempting to get in touch with Jiraiya or Tsunade, but he quickly dismissed the notion after realizing that he was probably a missing nin to the village and would only cause them problems. They had informed Jiraiya that he was no longer listed on the contract scroll, and he knew this from the toads. He had no idea how the man had handled it. He had no idea that Jiraiya believed him dead. He assumed it depended on what the toads had told him. Naruto shook his mind and turned to face the new generation, Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinen Shu, who was standing in front of him. He had united a generation and created the most powerful team in history. He glanced at the first individual in line. He called out to the farthest swordsman on the far left, Ryzen. The man in question nodded. Tall and slender, Ryzen had long, fiery red hair and a noticeable scar in the shape of a X on his left cheek. Despite his thin build, he had fair skin and good muscle. The kimono, which was made up of an outer and inner layer, was the most distinctive item of his attire. Although he is well known for having a light, finely textured, silk outer layer, the outer layer was red in color compared to the outer layer. The inner layer, which was entirely white, was far more comfortable and long-lasting. He wore a hakama, which are wide, flowing pants in white, underneath the kimono. Ryzen was able to perform acrobatic feats with ease because the trousers were loose-fitting. In order to withstand a great deal of wear and tear, they were also constructed from sturdy materials. He had an obi, a white cloth belt, tied up front around his waist. He wore the obi over his kimono, which he usually wears with his sword pushed through the left side when he carries two swords. The short sword, wakizashi, is worn through the obi, and the main sword is always slung by cords from the obi in order to increase his grip. He wraps black bandages around his hands and wears sandals. Ryzen was a master swordsman with nearly unrivaled skill, having trained as a samurai in the Land of Iron. Ryzen was referred to as a monster among monsters on multiple occasions because of his intense bloodlust when he loses control, despite the fact that all 7 of the group's swordsmen were incredibly talented and possessed monstrous abilities. He was known as the Shinku no Samurai, Crimson Samurai, because of his fiery red hair. He was also known as the Kirigakure no Akaihono, Red Blaze of Kirigakure, and the Kirigakure no Inazuma, Lightning of the Hidden Mist, because of his red hair and proficiency with fire and lightning-based attacks. Ryzen was a thoughtful, cool-headed individual who was nearly always grinning and rarely lost his temper. He was known to put his all into any business he started and had a good heart like Inara. He was also a little lethargic and took a while to become interested in any activity. However, once aroused, he could devote all of his energy to the task until he was certain that he had done everything he could to complete it. Naruto's black eyes shifted to the man next to Ryzen, Hayate Hazuka. In contrast to the typical appearance of most mist shinobi, Hayate was a tall, dark-skinned man with a lean build. His hair was silky black and medium length. In this case, it was sleeked back to reveal his entire forehead. His usual outfit was a plain black shirt, cut very loosely, with the collar turned up and one sleeve pulled up to sit just above his elbows, and light-colored trousers. He also wore leg warmers, Kirigakure's striped wrist and waist guard, and a sleeveless black shirt and pants. The standard Kirigakure forehead protector was also worn by him. He had a seal on his clothing that held his sword, Seryu Injetsu, Green Dragon Crescent Blade. This enabled him to instantly call forth the sword by simply touching the ceiling marks he had placed on his clothing. As a result, most of his opponents assume he is unarmed, but in reality, he is able to quickly draw the sword in an emergency and defeat his adversaries. He wore a belt around his waist that held a water bottle, just like the rest of his clan. He was a strong contender for the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinen Shu because of his proficiency in both Suiden and Kenjutsu. People who had seen his full rage and survived to tell about it had given him the nickname Kirigakure no Akari, Wrath of the Hidden Mist, because of his violent temper, which he frequently displayed during battle. Hayate was typically a serious, cool-headed person. He was well known for his devotion to the village and Cage. As a member of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinen Shu, he was an ambitious man who hoped to surpass his current senpai in the group as well as master all 7 swords of the previous generation, just like his predecessor Mangetsu Hazuka had done. Naruto glanced at the third member after the man nodded. Reiko Himegami. Reiko Himegami was a Jonin rank shinobi and a kunoichi from Kirigakure. She was considered one of the most powerful kunoichi of her generation and one of the strongest kunoichi in Kirigakure, and she was well known throughout the shinobi community for her courage and stunning beauty. In the shinobi community, Reiko was referred to as the Kirigakure no Yami, or Darkness of the Hidden Mist. As a result of her exploits across the shinobi world, she was currently the most well-known member of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinen Shu. She carried a Shikomizu, one of the most dreadful swords of the modern era, Amatsu Mikaboshi, August Star of Heaven, a blade concealed within a cane. She was also Kirigakure's current guardian and was well known for her unwavering devotion to her village and current Cage. In her 20s, Reiko was a tall, attractive young lady. She had a slim build, brown eyes, and long, flowing red hair. She was viewed as attractive, even beautiful, by many. When performing her duties as a member of the Seven Swordsmen, she appeared to prefer to wear her most familiar attire, which was a dark green, long-sleeved dress that hung just below the knees. The dress appeared to have a zip fastened at the front, leaving the front right side open from the waist down. Only the underside of her breasts and the upper portion of her upper arms were exposed by the dress. The mesh shirt she wore underneath covered more of her upper body than her dress, but it left a large cleavage and did not cover her shoulders. In addition, she had on dark green shorts and knee-length mesh leggings underneath. She wore a belt around her waist, the left side of which had a pouch fastened to the back. She also wore shin guards that reached over her knees and high-heeled sandals. In addition, she frequently wore dark nail polish and a ring with the kanji for blue, Ching, on it on her right ring finger. She usually wore dark-colored, leather-based, or occasionally both made, somewhat revealing garments. Reiko was smart, powerful, and attractive. She had a reputation for being kind and upbeat, but she could also be severe and harsh at times. She frequently chastised others for their bad behavior and habits, which made most people apologize out of concern that they would anger her. When the need arose, she was capable of being a very level-headed, mature, and composed person. Reiko was also very smart, aware of the risks she would encounter on a daily basis, and had a far better grasp of the shinobi world and its more dangerous characters, or missing nin. She also knew about some of the other influential ninja figures, such as the 5 Cages. She also had a strong sense of justice, was always ready to lend a helping hand to those in need, and would stop at nothing to keep her village safe. Reiko had a more feminine and playful side to her personality, even though she was generally composed, mature, and strict. She had an obsession with fashion, as evidenced by the fact that she was never seen wearing the same outfit for an extended period of time, and she secretly loved reading erotic novels, usually icha-icha, much to Naruto's amusement. One of the Seven Swordsmen's more sympathetic members, she was quick to sympathize with others and exhibited a great deal of emotional intelligence. She was even prepared to extend forgiveness to those who had wronged or deceived her. She appeared to respect other people and be open to hearing their opinions before passing judgment or choosing a course of action. With a flirtatious undertone, Reiko acknowledged, "Hi, Mizukage-sama." The others rolled their eyes at their subordinate, and Cage returned the smirk. After shaking his head and laughing, Naruto went on to the fourth person, Tuko Kanzaki. Tuko Kanzaki was a Jonin rank shinobi and a kunoichi from Kirigakure. She was regarded as Kiri's best taijutsu expert and one of the most formidable kunoichi of her generation because of her extensive use of the art. Tuko was considered one of the best shinobi Kirigakure had to offer. She was a successful ninja in her own right, famous for her exploits throughout the ninja world because of her skill with her 2-meter-long Nodashi, Shichiden Shichido, 7 Heaven 7 Swords. Tuko earned 2 nicknames during her ascent through the shinobi ranks. Kiri's Hado no Ju, Queen of Hearts, in the shinobi world, and Kanzaki no Kamikaze, Kanzaki of the Divine Wind, while she was an Anbu captain. Tuko was a tall, attractive young woman with long black hair that reached her hips and was typically pulled back in a ponytail. She had lavender-colored eyes and a well-proportioned body. Her skin was pure white, which was typically thought of as belonging to a princess. She wore jeans with one side cut off to show her thigh, a short white t-shirt with a knot tied at the bottom that exposed her navel, and a brown leather belt around her waist. Her breasts were much more visible because the t-shirt was tied down. Although many women were jealous, she enjoyed using it as a diversion to surprise her opponent from the thigh all the way down. Her snow-white leg was visible. She wore brown boots and gloves that brought back memories of her time at Anbu. She occasionally wore a denim jacket over her regular clothes. Tuko was a serious individual who put a lot of effort into pursuing her beliefs. She had a strong sense of justice and disliked injustice. Despite her short fuse, she occasionally exhibited cunning. She typically portrayed herself as a mature, independent woman, but in reality, she was happy and compassionate. When the need arose, she was capable of being a very level-headed, mature, and composed person. Tuko had proven to be a very shrewd and crafty person. Although she generally avoided conflict unless provoked or threatened, she was ruthless in combat and would do whatever it took to turn an opponent's strengths and weaknesses against them and win the battle. She had a tendency to start pointless conversations during battles in an attempt to divert her opponent's attention from her actual objectives. She was so confident in herself and her skills that she hardly ever displayed any signs of panic or distress. Tuko had a laid-back and playful personality, but she was also comparatively calm and mature most of the time. She would make up for her occasional carelessness and had a habit of making fun of or flirting with people younger than herself. Tuko was a determined, if not stubborn, woman who tended to act impulsively. She frequently illustrated her points with sarcasm and sporadic, obscure allusions. She is a capable leader because she would take charge of most situations. Although she was extremely courageous and frequently put herself in danger by charging forward, she frequently had to talk her way out of or physically defend herself in perilous circumstances. It had been demonstrated that Tuko would fearlessly go to any lengths to protect those she loves. In terms of strength and speed, Naruto had discovered that she was essentially a combination of Minato and Tsunade. With a punch she could create a huge crater and disappear without a hitch, but she also called for the Hachiman, 8 gates, to be opened. He learned this the hard way during a fight, and boy, did it test his mettle. She assured him that her rigorous training and resilient body had enabled her to manage the technique's aftereffects with no obvious harm other than extreme exhaustion, from which she had demonstrated a rapid recovery, allaying his concerns about her use of such a technique. Mizukage-sama, she nodded in her solemn voice, which she employed in meetings like the one that is currently taking place. After grinning at the stunning woman, Naruto turned to face his 5th swordsman, Koga Senryu. Koga was a Kirigakure-born shinobi belonging to the Jonin rank shinobi. The other 4 great shinobi nations mostly called him Kirigakure Hidina Raiju, Kirigakure's lightning beast of flash, but he was well known throughout the shinobi world for his proficiency in Raiden techniques. Koga was a tall, average-built young man with blue eyes and spiky blonde hair, just like Naruto used to be. Typically, he wore a Kirigakure Jonin with a white flak jacket with a single strap over one shoulder over a sleeveless black shirt. He was dressed in blue and white Kirigakure shin guards and black elbow-length arm guards. Underneath his loose shirt, which was tied with a brown belt and featured the Kirigakure symbol printed on it, he wore a mesh shirt. In addition, he wore brown shinobi boots that matched his belt and black pants. Additionally, Koga had the lightning Lee character tattooed on his right shoulder, signifying his chakra's affinity for the element Raiden. Although he doesn't appear to carry it around in his hometown, he is a sword user who typically carries a long sword on his back on his flak jacket. Koga was loud, impetuous, and easily agitated. He is frequently the center of attention and is renowned for his ostentatious entrances. He had enormous confidence in his skills and abilities and was a very proud person, being modest by nature. He would respect his opponent and even compliment them on their strength if they were strong enough to take on him. He was a very grounded individual who did not despise others. Even though he was impulsive and excited whenever someone was feeling down or upset, he would typically be there to lift their spirits in his own peculiar yet distinctive way, usually with a humorous twist. He was amiable and occasionally laid back, but he gets excited when something significant occurs. Koga was highly regarded by Kirigakure no Sato and was well known for his strength, abilities, and kind disposition. He was fiercely protective of those he loved and would stop at nothing to keep the village safe. Yo, Mizukage-sama. Koga gave a middle finger and forefinger salute. Naruto smiled at his 5th swordsman before turning to face his 6th, who winked at him immediately. Mei Terumi. Mei was also a contender for the Godem Mizukage post, but it turned out that despite the fact that no one would ever disparage her because she could, in her own words, melt their balls, everyone knew that she was a boring desk worker. She was well known for having 2 Kekkei Genkai, which is extremely uncommon. Futon, boil release. The first Kekkei Genkai was composed of techniques that fused water-based chakra with fire to produce a potent corrosive fume that could melt anything. Mei, the user, was a strong opponent since she could regulate the acidity of the vapor as well as its range. Yoden, lava release. An element equally as dangerous as Futon, was the second Kekkei Genkai in Yoden Jutsu. Fire and earth-based chakra were combined to produce a lava flow that could melt practically anything instead of working with molten rock. This chakra nature could also work with other related materials like lime, which was an alkaline powder. Mei was in her 30s and a slim, pretty woman. She had 4 bangs in the front, a top knot tied with a dark blue band, and ankle-length auburn hair styled in a herringbone pattern at the back. She had 2 long bangs that crossed each other on her chest, just below her chin, and 2 short bangs, one of which covered her right eye. She had pale green eyes. She wore a dark blue, long-sleeved dress that hung just below her knees. It appeared to be zip-locked at the front, but it was left open from the waist down on the front right side. Only the underside of her breasts and the upper portion of her upper arms were exposed by the dress. The mesh shirt she wore underneath covered more of her upper body than her dress, but it left a large cleavage and did not cover her shoulders. She also wore mesh leggings that hung down over her knees underneath shorts that matched the color of her dress. She wore a belt around her waist, the left side of which had a pouch fastened to the back. She also wore shin guards that extended past her knees and high-heeled sandals. In addition, she typically wore dark blue lipstick and dark nail polish. Regardless of what she was saying, including making a death threat, Mei was a happy person who was nearly always grinning, but she was generally good-natured, praising others and trying to stay out of trouble. However, Naruto had learned that he should never irritate a woman, particularly when he brought up his own romantic history within earshot. Mei grinned and purred, Naruto-kun. Reiko gave her a glare, which she quickly ignored to focus on the man seated in front of her, a strong man who had saved her nation and whom she hoped to make love to one day. That is, if he activated the CRA on himself. And then she had to convince Reiko, though she didn't think it would be easy. Glaring at the equally attractive woman, Reiko thought, "Keep your hands and eyes away from my man, bitch." She blatantly disregarded the fact that Naruto would eventually need to take more than one wife when she said, "He's mine and mine only." Naruto grinned at the attractive woman while observing Reiko's warning glare, which he had learned to avoid with careful practice. He turned to his final swordsman and winked at her to calm her down. He yelled to his last swordsman, Preda. Once a member of the cult group Jashin, Wicked Heart, Evil Design, Preda was one of their most enigmatic members because he kept his personal life to himself. He joined the group during the Third Great Shinobi World War and, prior to departing the group, was a devout Jashinism supporter for a considerable amount of time. He was paired with Hidan, a fellow Jashinist at the time, while he was a member of the group. Preda was a master of the Jujutsu, curse techniques, line of ninjutsu and was well known for using techniques related to Jashin. Because of his deep understanding of the supernatural in the shinobi world and his capacity for communication with the dead, he was also frequently referred to as a shaman. Because of his special skills, he was therefore a highly sought-after person who had been sought after by numerous shinobi organizations, both good and bad. He may be one of the few surviving Akumu descendants, as he was found to possess the uncommon Kekkei Genkai, Maiton, Dark Release, of the Akumu clan, Nightmare clan. The standard double-bladed scythe was his preferred weapon. It looked like Preda was a young man in his mid to late 20s. His blue hair and an odd tattoo or marking around his right eye from when he was first initiated into the Jashin cult were his most noticeable features. Even though he had lived for a very long time, his appearance had not changed much since the Third Great Shinobi World War. This could be because he had experimented a lot with the different jutsu of the Jashin religion. He didn't actually wear a black coat. Instead, he wore a black jacket, black shoes, a green shirt, and gray pants as his default outfit. Preda was a man of few words, speaking only when absolutely necessary or when he needed to support his position. Preda himself seemed more calm, rational, cunning, and intelligent than his Jashin brothers, who were typically egotistical, vicious, bloodthirsty, and insane. Given that he enjoyed killing and Naruto only killed when he had no other choice, one might wonder why someone with his background would ever collaborate with Naruto, let alone serve him. Like all the swordsmen, Preda was devoted to Naruto regardless of his motivations. If Naruto had to compare him to anyone, Preda would have looked at his cage, nodded in acknowledgement, and then closed his eyes like Neji. Naruto sighed, leaned forward, put his elbows on the desk, interlaced his fingers, and brought them up to his face, I don't usually call you here all at once, so I'm sure you're wondering what this meeting is about, he said. Koga looked around and nodded. Pretty much, and since there's no war going on, it is kinda strange for us all to be gathered. And for you to be so serious too. Reiko raised an eyebrow, perplexed as to why the Mizukage suddenly appeared elderly. Naruto nodded absently and laughed lightly. Everyone, including the normally silent Preta, straightened up on full alert as soon as he said, Akatsuki is moving at last, and I fear Orochimaru is no longer going to keep idle either. Preta was a little taken aback by being the first to inquire, how do you know? Naruto gave him a quick look. There have been reports all over the different countries of pairs of shinobi. Missing nin wearing black cloaks with red clouds on them. One particular group was reported butchering a small settlement and performing a strange ritual with blood. Naruto sighed. That's all we got from our spies and hunter nin. Preta sighed and said, Hidan. Mei's delicate eyebrow went up and she asked, your old partner? All of them had heard tidbits about Preta's past, including his partnerships and actions since they had all killed. For different reasons, of course. None of them treated him any differently, but the fact that they were now all partners was more significant. Preta nodded and said, yes, he is a true immortal, unlike me. A true immortal? Tuko shifted her nodashi to face him, her expression bewildered. What's the difference? Preta sighed at the amount of words she had to use. My immortality is not true immortality. I gained everlasting youth, which I refer to as immortality, in the sense that I do not age and therefore cannot die from old age. However, I can be killed through other means, such as severe injury, very severe injury. He clarified as quickly as possible. The whole room became heavy and tense as they took in the news. Hidan, however, simply cannot die if he is beheaded. He can still talk despite being separated. No matter what you do, what jutsu you use, or how much you cut him up, he cannot die. With wide eyes, Reiko looked at Naruto, who had his eyes closed, and said, so, we can't kill him. What sort of people are there in Akatsuki? Despite Naruto's strength, these guys are pursuing him. Gazing at each of them, Naruto said, it doesn't matter. The blue-haired man nodded in agreement as he said, Preta, I want you to write down everything you know about Hidan later on, his appearance, skills, how he speaks, what shampoo he uses, everything. Hi, Mizukage-sama. Raizen frowned as he went over numerous situations in which they might run into Akatsuki and what they currently knew about them. If Akatsuki is finally on the move, then what's that mean for us? He asked. Us? Reiko frowned as she asked. She gripped her sword at her side and yelled, we should be more worried about Naruto-kun. It differed from other swords in appearance because the sword itself was housed inside a cane. And its hilt was still the cane's handle. The entire sword looked like a regular walking stick because the handle and scabbard were both sleek black. Koga smiled mockingly and said, of course you're worried about Naruto-kun. Saying something like that about your coworker and cage would normally result in punishment. Who else will keep you warm in bed? But everything went smoothly when you said it in front of Naruto, your cage, when it was just the 8 of them. Naruto didn't care what they called him or implied because they were all his best friends. He had informed them, however, that although he didn't mind being called that when it was just the 2 of them, he did object when it was formal or during a meeting with influential people, like the daimyo. But that didn't stop the blush from showing on both Naruto's and Reiko's cheeks. Reiko's blush was more noticeable, probably because she was a pervert and her nose was dripping blood. Although everyone was aware of her propensity to read Icha flirt openly with Naruto, it wasn't as if she was a closet pervert. Koga. Reiko, yelled Hayate, a little irritated by their immature demeanor, particularly when discussing the Akatsuki. Play after, this is important. While Reiko smirked and turned away as though in triumph, Koga complained, spoil sport. Mei asked the 22-year-old, well, what are we going to do, Mizukage-sama? Silently, as though analyzing them before letting out a sigh, Naruto stared at them all. He repeated the question rhetorically, what are we going to do? It's time we stopped hanging back and watching the world pass us. It's time we finally revealed ourselves in the new Kirigakure no Sato to the world. He said with a broad smile. Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze Uchiha found himself at the center of a changing world. His primary force is Shinobi Katana Shichin and Shu.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.